You have been alive for every single moment of your existence. You were there when you took your first step. You were there when you fell in love for the first time. You were there for every embarrassing memory, every triumph, every ordinary Tuesday afternoon you can barely remember. And yet, if someone asks you to point to yourself, not your body, not your name, not your job, but you, the actual you will hesitate. Because here is the problem. The more carefully you look for yourself, the harder you are to find. This is not a philosophical riddle. This is what happens when neuroscience, psychology, and thousands of years of human thought all point at the same uncomfortable answer. You are not what you think you are. Let's start with the most obvious version of you, your body. You feel like your body is you. It moves when you want it to. It hurts when it gets injured. It gets hungry, tired, excited. Surely this physical thing is you. But consider this, every cell in your body is constantly dying and being replaced. The cells lining your stomach replace themselves every 5 days. Your skin replaces itself every 2 to 4 weeks. Your red blood cells last about 4 months. Even your bones, which feel permanent and solid, are completely replaced roughly every 10 years. The body you have right now shares almost no physical material with the body you had as a child. You are, in a very literal sense, a completely different physical object than you were 15 years ago. So if your body is constantly replacing itself, and yet you feel continuous, you feel like the same person who was embarrassed in school 20 years ago, then whatever you are, it cannot just be the body. Maybe you are your brain. The brain is where your thoughts happen, where your memories live, where your personality is formed. Surely the brain is you. But the brain is not a static object either. It changes constantly. Every experience you have physically rewires it. New neural connections form. Old ones weaken and disappear. The brain you have today, shaped by everything you have ever seen, felt, learned, and lost, is structurally different from the brain you had 10 years ago. And here is something even stranger. Your brain was not built to show you reality. It was built to keep you alive. Everything you see, hear, touch, taste, and smell is a construction. Your brain receives raw sensory data and then builds a model of the world from that data. The colors you see are not out there in the universe. Color is an interpretation your brain creates. The sounds you hear are not inherently meaningful. Meaning is something your brain adds. You do not experience the world directly. You experience your brain's best guess at what the world is. This means the version of reality you walk around in every day is a hallucination, a controlled, useful, mostly accurate hallucination, but a hallucination nonetheless, and the self you experience inside that hallucination. The sense of being a unified, continuous, stable you who is experiencing all of this, that is also a construction, also a model, also your brain's best guess. Neuroscientist Anil Seth calls this the controlled hallucination of self. Your brain generates a model of who you are, just as it generates a model of the external world, and you experience that model as reality. This is not abstract. This has very real implications. When you feel like a failure after making a mistake, that feeling is not an objective truth. It is a story your brain is telling about you, using the particular neural architecture built by your particular history of experiences. When you feel certain about who you are, your values, your personality, your tastes, those certainties are not fixed features of a permanent self. They are patterns in a brain that is constantly changing. The Scottish philosopher David Hume tried to find himself in the 18th century. He wrote that when he entered most intimately into what he called himself, he always stumbled upon some particular perception or other, a thought, a feeling, a sensation. He could never catch himself without a perception. He could never observe a self. Only the contents of a self. He concluded that what we call the self is not a thing but a bundle of perceptions, a collection of experiences flowing past each other, no observer, just the observations. Buddhism arrived at almost the exact same conclusion 2,000 years earlier. The concept of unatun self is one of the core teachings of Buddhist philosophy. The idea is that what you call yourself is not a fixed, permanent entity. It is a process, a flowing, changing collection of sensations, thoughts, and perceptions. With no permanent substance at the center, modern neuroscience has spent decades arriving at the same place through a completely different route. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has spent his career studying patients with brain damage that affects their sense of self. His research suggests that the self is not located in one place in the brain. It is an ongoing process, assembled moment to moment from body signals, memory, emotion, and narrative. The word narrative is crucial here, Because one of the most important things your brain does is tell you a story about yourself, a continuous story that connects the person who existed yesterday to the person who exists today, and the person who will exist tomorrow. Without that story, the sense of being a unified self would dissolve. This is not a metaphor. People who suffer damage to the parts of the brain that maintain autobiographical memory, the story of their own lives, often lose their sense of continuous identity. They do not experience themselves as the same person who existed before the damage. The story broke, and with it, the self, which means you, are, in a profound and literal sense, a story. Not a story that someone else tells about you. A story your brain tells to itself every waking moment to maintain the useful illusion of being a unified, continuous, experiencing self. So who is telling the story? This is where it gets deeply strange, because the part of your brain that narrates your experience, that constructs the story of you, is not the same as the part that makes decisions. It is not fully conscious of the processes that drive your behavior. In the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted a famous experiment. He asked participants to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it, and to note the moment they became conscious of the decision to move. He measured the electrical activity in their brains throughout. What he found disturbed the scientific community. The brain showed electrical activity preparing for the movement called the readiness potential about half a second before the participants reported becoming conscious of the decision to move. Your brain had already decided before you were aware of deciding. This does not mean free will is completely impossible. The debate continues, but it means that the conscious you, the narrator, the one who feels like it is in charge, may be more of a commentator than a commander, more of a journalist reporting on events that have already happened than a general directing the action. The self that you experience as being in control may be telling itself a story about decisions that were already made. This is what psychologist Michael Gazzaniga, who studied patients whose two brain hemispheres had been surgically separated, called the interpreter. The left hemisphere of the brain, he found, constantly generates explanations for behavior. Even when it has no access to the true cause, it confabulates, it makes up reasons, and it believes them completely. You do this too, every day. The narrator in your head is not always or perhaps ever giving you the full and accurate story of why you do what you do. So we have established something strange. Your body is not you because it is constantly being replaced. Your brain is not a fixed thing but a changing process. Your perception of reality is a construction, not a direct feed. Your sense of self is a model, not a substance. Your autobiographical narrative can be disrupted and even destroyed by brain damage, and the conscious narrator you experience as yourself may be generating explanations rather than controlling behavior. What is left? Some philosophers would say consciousness, the bare experience of being aware, whatever it is that makes you feel like there is something it is like to be you. Philosopher David Hume has called this the hard problem of consciousness. Science can explain how the brain processes information. It can explain how neurons fire. It can even explain to some extent why certain experiences feel a certain way, but it cannot yet explain why there is any experience at all, why there is something it is like to be you, rather than just information processing happening in the dark. This gap between the brain as a physical object and consciousness as a felt experience is one of the deepest unsolved problems in all of science and philosophy. And here is the strange and somehow beautiful part of all of this. Every human being who has ever existed has walked around inside this mystery. The philosopher in there study, the shaman by the fire, the child asking why for the first time, the person sitting quietly at the end of a long day wondering who they are. They have all been living inside the same unanswered question. The fact that you cannot find yourself, that the more carefully you look, the more you seem to dissolve into a collection of processes and stories and constructions, does not mean there is nothing there. It may mean that what you are is not a thing to be found. It is something that happens, an event, a process, a pattern that has been running continuously since the moment you were born, gathering experience, building stories, making meaning, loving people, remembering, forgetting, changing, and remaining somehow recognizably itself through all of it. The atoms that make up your body were forged in stars billions of years ago. The neural patterns that make up your mind have been shaped by every person you have ever met, every book you have ever read, every moment of pain and joy you have ever lived through. You are not a self that has experiences, you are the experiencing itself. And that whatever it is has never happened before and will never happen again.